Let me start the first part with 4 main points that I wanted to discuss here, and then to talk about our responsibility. When it comes to the perceptions, it's not new. And this is where we have to come with a very deep historical input as to, for example, the perception of Islam in Europe today in the West. It's not new what we are facing. It's a very old story. In fact, if you go and you try to understand and you try to get a sense of how the European identity was shaped through history, very often the perception was that we were defining the European identity against an identity which was not the European identity. It was a negative identity, and the great majority of what we had, and this is something that we have in our scholarship in historical studies, is in fact Islam was perceived as the religion of the other. All what we have in the perception that in the Catholic Church, for example, about the perception that who was Muhammad as a prophet and messenger, the morality of the Muslims was the morality of the other. It was not our morality. And mainly all what we have now about women and sexuality, about Muslims being completely backward now, was exactly the opposite of what we had in the Middle Ages about Muslims and about the Arab culture. Permissive, very open, too much open to this. So once again, yesterday too open the other, today completely closed the other again. So the perception, the way you shape the other to define yourself is something that we have and we need to get from a very old time. Now, the power of the media, the power of the discussion that we have now in the West, it's also coming out of something which is a new reality. By the way, Muslims in Europe or Muslims in the West, we have a new presence, but this presence is a very old presence. To the point that, remember, even in the discussion that we have in Eastern Europe, we in Western Europe, we have forgotten that the Muslim presence in Eastern Europe is as old as the Christian presence. But the way it was portrayed just when the crisis started in Eastern Europe is these are Turks. They are not really European. And I remember a discussion with Mustafa Ceric, the Mufti of Sarajevo, say, are you going to teach me what it means to be a European? I'm alien. And he said that when the controversy started, this is where he was perceived by people coming from Europe as not really European. Too much Muslim to be a true European. A perception with people who was representing the very old presence in Eastern Europe. And we have a double problem, Western Europeans, is that we think that Europe is the West part of the European continent, and then we don't deal with this presence as an old presence, meaning that European Islam, and once again, I always repeat this, for me there is one Islam with many cultures, and I don't have a problem saying that as Muslims we have the same principles, and our culture is a European culture. The European Islam that you have in the Balkans, in the Eastern Europe, it's a very old thing, but you can see in times of crisis, the perception is very powerful, that you are the other, that you are not part of our continent, that you have to go back to the Turks and the Ottoman Empire as something which is translating your historical experience here. So old perceptions that are coming back in one way, in another, by shaping the other, and Islam is the other. In many ways, and we wrote an article with Ivan Kalmar in a book which it was gathering Jewish scholars and Muslim scholars and working together on this. We wrote an article about the Jewish experience and the Muslim experience when it came to anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. There are many things that are similar in the way the construction of the other, or the one who is perceived as the other and now settling down among ourselves. So when the other is become a we, or is pretending, or is claiming that not pretending is the French word for claiming that he's one of us, is even more dangerous. So this historical experience here, it's part of something that we had in our history in Europe, and it's connected also with the colonial discourse about Islam. So you cannot disconnect, even in this country, you can't disconnect the discourse on Islam from the historical experience of colonialism. In Indonesia, in Asia, and you have it in many European countries, British societies, French societies. There is no way you can speak about Islam as being a European religion if you don't get the sense that there is a very long historical experience of Islam being the religion of the colonized people and now being part of the society. So we can now start talking about Western Muslims and to speak about the perception. But if we want to be serious, and especially within academia, we need to get this historical understanding, what happened in our history. And the fact that the perception is here, but not only this. In scholarship, you can, in our universities in Europe, get a PhD in philosophy, a PhD in science, a PhD in sociology, a PhD in history, and you know nothing about the real presence of the Muslim presence in our society, in our continent, and the fact that the European identity was shaped out of the three, even more than that, but at least the three main contributions when it comes to religion: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That if we don't get this, if we are teaching in our schools that our civilization and our culture is Jewish and Christian, how are you going to get the citizens to get after all this, that Islam is part of you? No, the Muslim is not part of what you were taught in your schools, to the point that in universities it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. Look at what we are teaching in philosophy. How many philosophers coming from another tradition than the perceived Judeo-Christian tradition are taught in our universities? So how is it that when we speak about Islam, we need to have Islamic studies and not Muslim scholars in philosophy? How are we creating a specific department to speak about Islam when Islam should be everywhere if we are serious about science, philosophy, and sociology and everything, at least to get a sense that these scholars were part of our legacy and our history? It's not there, so the perceptions is carried on. So it's very difficult after this at the academic level to change this perception, and once again, we are not facing the reality as it should be in a scholarly way.